In a previous video, I showed you how to create a date range using model parameters. We now have this date range that will allow us to select a start month and an end month and see the months in between those two dates. But what I would like to do in this video is show you how you can take that month range and do some other interesting things with it. First of all, what we're going to look at is simple aggregates of the month range. So the easiest way to create an aggregate is to go find the month range list that you're using, right click on it, and you'll see under create formula, we've got aggregate functions that we can use. So in this case, I'm going to just choose aggregate, and it's going to create this new formula. I'm going to make it shareable so it's reusable, and we'll just call this total range. And I'm going to create a second one. In this case, I'm going to right click and choose average. And I'm going to make this one shareable as well. So we'll just call this average range. Okay, so I've now created two of them, a total and an average. Now, one of the things to be aware of is when you're creating these sorts of objects, you really have to think through, how am I going to use them? What is the purpose that they're going to serve in my analytics? In this instance where I'm using a trend chart, it makes no sense to include something like the total range in this chart, because as soon as I run it, you'll see it's going to throw off my scale because it's the sum of all the values within that range. So that doesn't make any sense. I could use the average in this example, but that would just be the last bar in this chart, and that itself is also not very useful. So what you'll find is in this particular instance with this average and total, they don't make sense in a trend chart, but they might make sense as an attribute in another visualization. I'm going to show you it as a grid, but just know you could build a different type of chart and use this aggregate value in that chart. It just doesn't make sense for a trend chart. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new report. In this report, I'm just going to grab an attribute and throw it on the rows. And then I'm going to go find my date attribute that I've created my aggregates for. And let's go ahead and grab those aggregate values. So I'll grab the total range and the average range. And let's put those on columns. And then let's do this for our sales. So what we're seeing is the average sales value across that range and the total value. So as I make changes here, so let's go to July of 2015, you'll see those numbers readjust to fit the time range that I'm looking at. So if we go July of 2016, let's go July of 2015, so 13 months in this case, I'm looking at the total across those 13 months or the average within those 13 months. All right, so that's one way that you could leverage those. Another way is, let's say as an example, I really would like to take that average and have it drawn as a separate line across this trend chart. Well, to do that, I couldn't actually add those objects to the date dimension itself. I need to have them separate from the date dimension. So the way that I would do that is I would actually create a measure. And so to do that, I will just create a brand new formula. And in this formula, you'll see you've got a number of options here. What we're going to choose is we're going to choose an average aggregation. So we want to start with a list, and the list we're going to use in this case is our range. So we're going to go find our range and make that the input to the list, and then it asks us for a data point to base this on. Now in this case, we're just going to keep it simple, and we're just going to say sales. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to compute the average sales across that date range. And we'll set the format string here. And we actually want this to be on the measure dimension. So we're going to attach this to the measure dimension. Let's go ahead and save this. And we're just going to call this average sales range. And now if I come back over here and go to my measures, what I should see is I've got this new measure here called average sales range. I could go ahead and select that. And by default, you'll see it'll put both measures in two separate charts. I'm going to add this to the same chart on the primary axis, but this one's going to be a line chart. And what you'll see, and let me just reorder these so that the line is in the front. What you'll see now is for my date range, this average will represent the value. And in the later versions of Pyramid 2020, what I can do is come in here and say, okay, let's turn on the label for this average so that I can actually see the value. So you can see it's 360,000. So if I were to modify this date range, you can see that value is changing. So as the range changes, so does the average value. And so you can use the formula module to create these aggregate values using the aggregation blocks and get what you need so that for your charts, you've got it as a measure. For your grids, you've got it as just a base value within the date attribute. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and we'll talk again soon.